All right, welcome everybody to session 3 on this snowy evening. It's nice that we don't have to cancel and we can meet on Zoom. Hopefully Father John will jump on here shortly, and we will hand it over to Susan to start our prayer.
Okay, welcome everyone. In the name of the Holy Spirit, amen. Good and gracious God, who loves and delights in all people, we stand in awe before you, knowing that the spark of life within each person on earth is the spark of your divine love. Differences among cultures and races are multicolored manifestations of your light. May our hearts and minds be open to similarities and differences among our sisters and brothers. We place our hopes for racial harmony in our committed action and in your presence in our neighbor. May all people live in peace. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. This is one of many prayers that the Sisters of Mercy have put together around racial justice, and I find them very beautiful. Welcome. I agree with Joan. It's a blessing that we can get together on Zoom, especially on a night like this. So we're all
Good evening, everybody.
Oh, there. Hi, Father John. Yay.
Here.
Susan?
At a prayer, if you have some words, Father.
I did catch the prayer. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, good, good. So we're up to chapters 5 and 6. We talked a little bit about the good, bad binary the first week, and maybe even a little bit last week. So chapter 5 is the good, bad binary, and we'll start with that. Does anybody have reflections about the good, bad binary, or anything you read about her definition of racism, or how this definition made you feel?
I wonder from last week's conversation, if anyone had any reflections or thoughts on their own personal experience of the good, bad binary, either something you recognize within yourself or maybe someone else you were interacting with where you could see the good, bad binary at play.
I'll share one of my experiences. I'm telling on myself, but this happened about 15 years ago when I was a middle school teacher at Moore Middle School. It was in October, and I'd already developed a really good relationship with the students, and it was a pretty diverse class. But in the middle of October, I got a new student named Unica, and I thought I had greeted her at the door like I greeted everybody, and I went on, and started class. This was her first day of class, and we were barely into class, and she's coming up over her desk, coming at me basically saying, "Mrs. Sherman is a racist." And I was appalled because the thought of me being a racist was just so repugnant to me, and I just couldn't imagine where she was coming from. Well, immediately the kids in the class took up for me and went, "Mrs. Sherman's not a racist," and they grabbed her. And I felt very affirmed by that. I'm not a racist. See, they're right. I'm not a racist. And honestly, it wasn't until I read this book, I hadn't thought a lot about that, but I realized that that's the good, bad binary functioning in me. I was more interested in being affirmed that I wasn't a racist than getting to the bottom of this girl's feelings. And, I see that as a real lack in me. Now, we went on to develop a really good relationship, and I think she would even say it was good. I took her to Jefferson Mall a couple of days. I got to know her and found out about her grandmother. But what a missed opportunity. I had an opportunity to talk to her about, what did I do or say that made you think that? Or maybe it wasn't something I did or said. Who knows what it was? But I'll never, ever get that opportunity again because of my own white fragility. and my own fear of being labeled a racist. Now I know I do have racism in me. And every time that I learn about my own racism, it makes me a better person, a better advocate for people who have been oppressed. So it's very interesting to me because I really felt okay about that situation. But obviously, subconsciously, it stayed there. And this book pulled it up. So I don't know, maybe you've had some similar experiences where, you know, you saw the racism in yourself or somebody else, and the book helped you see it so that you could address it. Because the more we repress things and ignore our own issues and our own shortcomings, the more we are being racist and propping up that system that we've all lived with for most of our lives, for me, you know, decades. So anyway, that was an example for me that Robin helped me see my own white fragility and racism when I reflected back on something that happened 15 years ago or 16 years ago. So anybody else have anything, even something very different than that the book helped you to kind of process?
I think this is Marissa Tishner, and I think one of the things that came to light to me is that it's not anybody's responsibility to teach me about racism. It's my responsibility to learn about it. You know, there was something on page 78 that said all exempt the person from any responsibility or participation in the problem. They take race off the table and close rather than open any further exploration. In doing so, they protect the racial status quo. And I think that's, you know.
I think that makes a lot of sense. This is Carmel in Bardstown. One of the things that I was looking at that chart on page 72 where it's got the racist equals bad and not racist equals good. And I think to put that into context to what Susan was saying, anytime somebody calls you a racist, instead of immediately jumping and saying, I'm not racist and defending yourself, that can be your clue and your cue to say, tell me why you said that. Tell me what you're feeling. Tell me what you mean by that. And instead of just jumping to say I'm not racist, because I'm looking at that chart and I'm saying racist equals bad, ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited, but not racist equals. I just want to title that column also racist, but progressive, educated, open-minded, well-intentioned. You can be all those things and also racist because you're a product of this racist society. And that is what it is. And we can deal with that. And we can deal with that by saying, oh, you called me a racist. Tell me what you mean by that. What am I missing? What am I not hearing? And then, be open to that. I'm done.
Right. And that's ultimately what Robin is saying, that this good bad binary is a false assumption that we make. And it's a protective mechanism. It helps us to avoid the issue, right? So this is a great venue. If I say something that is offensive to you, I hope you will say, wait a minute, Susan, did you hear what you said? Or, that doesn't seem like it's consistent with what Robin says. It's really good to practice saying those things in safe places. And this is a safe place. So don't hesitate to call me out because I know I'll misspeak. And it's a good practice for when you're in a less safe environment. How are we going to, I don't like to say the word call out, but that's what we're doing. How are we going to stand up against racism? So it's something to think about. How can I word my, and some of you probably have experiences of that. You've experienced a racial incident, even something little like somebody telling a joke at work. How did you, I bet a lot of you have good examples of that.
Well, I was just going to say, I wanted to thank you, Susan, for being so vulnerable and sharing your example. I had not the same example, but in my old career, I hosted a Black Women's Summit because we had so few Black women
check
in our
your
company.
text message. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
I'm sorry. I was going to call.
I'm sorry. Okay, and so anyway, I was really proud of that. And so we gathered these women together from all over the country, and they came to Louisville. And then, of course, once I opened up the summit, they all kind of looked at me, and I realized I needed to leave because I'm not Black. And so I was kind of hurt. I mean, this chapter said to me, I'm embarrassed to admit that, because I was such a champion and, wanting to empower, but at the same time, I kind of thought it was about me. And so what I really appreciated about this chapter is it is about us as white people recognizing we are a race and we are participating in the society that has been racist since day one. But it's really not about me because, or if we treat them the way they need to be treated, not the way we want to treat them, it changes your perspective, I guess. So it's kind of knowing where is it about me and where is it not about me.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a good point.
I would just add to that, that it also provides an opportunity when the conversation can become very honest. It provides an opportunity to understand how the other person feels, which you may or may not know. They could say something to bring up the conversation, like the student that spoke to Susan, but then you also have to kind of understand, well, where was that student coming from? What had triggered that? What is she feeling that causes her to broach the subject with you? But then the key piece is it's an opportunity to respond to the person's feeling, not just to understand it as an intellectual exercise, but to respond to the person's feeling. And that's the beginning of a healing process that can happen. Okay, that can begin to close the gap of racism in people's individual lives. I'll give you just a quick example of that. I was asked to do a anti-racism session similar to what Robin does as her work years ago for a faculty in a certain city, high school faculty, very upper class, upper middle class, I believe all white, except there was one African-American teacher on the faculty. And this session was just for the faculty. And in the course of the morning, as I'm addressing some of these issues, I noticed that they were taking all this information in. So during the lunchtime, I approached the African-American teacher and I asked him if he would be willing to do something called a speak out, which means to take a specific situation where you felt the way you were treated in that situation was racially driven as you saw it, and share that with your peers. So he said he was willing to do it, and he did. And he very courageously, very vulnerably shared the experience where a white student had gone to the principal or something, had said something against the Black teacher, and the white principal came down on the Black teacher following whatever the white student said. And after he related that, I said, make sure that you let people know how it made you feel.
Yeah.
Now, that's where the whole session became painful, because all of the other white teachers in the room kept wanting to process the event. And I kept saying, somebody respond to how the man was made to feel. And they couldn't see it. All they could do was kept processing the event, trying to sort of clean it up, the event itself. And the man is standing there with an open wound still from years ago. And none of them were able to tune in or touch into that until I finally said to them, is there anybody in this room that can stand up and say to this man, I am sorry that you were treated that way and that you made to feel that way? And finally, someone did. What was interesting, at the end of that whole day, we had a little debriefing session with the few faculty members that had organized the day. And one of them brought that, he told me he was very angry with me because he felt like I was pushing them to say something or do something that they did not want to do. And I said, well, I'm not so sure that you consciously did or did not want to do it. I just felt that no one was getting the point that needed to be made. Okay. But you can see the dynamics at play there. And it was a golden opportunity to help heal a wound that had been festering inside this man for some years. And none of his other colleagues, even when he related the story to them, could respond in a way that was supportive or empathetic or healing for him.
And that, that the way that they were discussing that, it's a place of power and privilege that we people as white people do. We intellectualize and take control of the situation and intellectualize about it and not get to the heart of what's really happening. And that's a place of privilege to be. And that's conscious or unconscious, that's something that we as white people do. Oh.
Anyone else have any sort of similar experience or comments with that?
I just wanted to say real quickly that I don't know that it's just a white people issue. It's also like an older person issue, as in a parent issue. If a child says, I'm mad, we say, oh, get over it. Or they say, I'm hurt. We say, you're not hurt. You know, we are not trained in listening to what people are feeling. We are just not trained. We are trained to rationalize it, like you were saying, intellectualize it and say, get over it. But we are not trained in the language of feelings. I don't think it's just black, white. I think it's also older and younger. It's predacious. It's everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. My point in sharing the experience is specifically the type of day that they were asking for me to help them address. And it was specifically, they wanted to become more racially conscious and aware and sensitive, not just among themselves, but because of the students that they would be teaching in their classroom. And so in that context, and the fact that it was only one African-American teacher and on the faculty, it clearly spoke to me as if it did have some racial implications, right along the lines of, like I said, of the work that Robin has been doing, which caused her to write this book in the first place. But I do agree, it's not just that, but that certainly has its own variance to it.
Gary, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, I had a moment of recognition. It's that the Colorblind and Color Celebrate section 77, 78 in the book. And on the top of page 78, I read the first thing. I was in the Peace Corps, and that was me. So it was amazing. It brought back some things for me. And I served in Congo. And I always looked at it a little differently and thought the shoe was on the other foot in many ways. And then I experienced things that a lot of people had not experienced before. I lived about 2 years in the Congo as a Peace Corps volunteer. And of course, I was in quite a minority group there. I was a teacher at a school, but of course, also thought of as a wealthy person everywhere I went. And even though we were earning what Peace Corps volunteers earned. And I remember one time I had overreacted when some kids ran up to me and were yelling, Mondele, Mondele, white person, with their hands open like this. And I said, basically told him to go away and leave me alone, leave me alone. And I kind of overreacted to the whole thing, perhaps, but it was something it was always a different reaction from me afterwards when I came back, I think, and tried to look at things a little differently. Being in the minority for a short time is, of course, nothing like a lot of people have experienced in the United States. So, but it was a good moment of reflection and good experience overall.
Well, thank you, Gary.
Mary, did you want to say something? Yeah, unmute, Mary.
Yes, Barry.
This has given me a great deal of insight. I was retired from the University of Illinois and I went back to work extra help, and I was sharing an office with a Black woman that I had known, sort of known, from another department on campus. And I was very excited to work with her. I'd always admired her and I really wanted to get to know her. And I think I stepped on every racist landmine unknowingly that I could have. And, really, she was such an interesting person and I really wanted to know about her life. And her grandmother had been a slave and I was very interested in getting to know her. And I'm very open, I'm very honest. But I stepped on, in hindsight now, I think about this woman a lot. It's been 10 years and I think about her a lot and how insensitive I must have been in my awkward whiteness, trying to build a friendship. Finally, one day she said to me, I do not want to be your friend. You do not understand. I don't want to be your friend. She thought I talked too much. So I got up quietly and we shared a space. I walked out, I cried, I came back. I was very quiet. And I said, I'm really sorry. I ask questions because that's the way I learned to build friendships. And finally, we slowly worked back to talking to each other. But I've thought a lot about this. I've thought a lot about what did I do wrong? And I realize it now. One, it's not her responsibility to teach me about race. That's my racism, or about what she has gone through in her life. That's my responsibility. And I have one good thing about the pandemic is I have dedicated this whole year to one thing, and that is studying racism and how it impacts my life and all the people around me. And I think about this woman, Katie, and I think if I could find her, I would write her a letter, because in her abruptness to me, as a feedback for my stupidity, I haven't stopped thinking about that. And in a way that was an awakening for me. And I would love to write her a letter and apologize for my, I told her once that I hadn't seen color. I remember the exact point that I saw color. I was in 3rd grade sitting next to a kid, and the kids laughed at me when all of a sudden I noticed, and that he was brown. And I realize now that that is a racist statement. I should have been able to have seen him. I should have known who he was. I was only 8 years old, but I still should have known. So it's been an interesting journey. And the next time I had an encounter with someone a number of years later, she was telling me how she had been insulted. She was a Black woman, and she was telling me how she'd been insulted in a grocery store. And the man had humiliated her because she was a coworker of mine and she did not have enough money to pay for her bill. Nobody said anything. She was in a room full of white women and none of us said anything. And I thought about that all night. What had happened, and it never should have happened to her. And then we began to build a friendship because I began to really hear a little more about what it was like to be Black. I have a long way to go. I know that, which is why I'm doing this book, and I love it. That's it.
Oh, thank you, Mary.
Mhm.
And Mary, you stepped into the realm that Father was telling us about. You focused on her humanity and her feelings and her hurt and her pain. And you got out of yourself, so to speak. So
I have a long way to go though, and I'm getting old, so I need to figure this out. So I'm a better person. But that's why I'm here, listening. Thank you.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Stan Yanchis from Champaign meeting. This was back in 1990s. We had just so many such, we were right at the cusp of being under a consent decree order. And one of the things that our school district did in Champaign was to have a survey of families, students, and faculty about racial expressions, feelings, understandings in the school. And I was at I was a building steward, and I was on the union executive council. And we were having our monthly meeting to go over these surveys, the results of these surveys. And people were very upset. And there was some questions about, for example, third graders being asked and they weren't old enough to understand certain things. But when we got to the survey from the staff, one of the questions was, have you ever been made to feel uncomfortable in the building in which you teach because of your racial identity? And 97% of the people of color responded yes to that. So as we were going through these items, and when that question came up, there was a person in the room. There were about 35 people, 3 people of color, out of 3 out of 35 or so union stewards, and shouted out, "Well, that's just not true. Our Black teachers don't feel that way in our building." And fortunately, the 3 individuals there who were close friends, wonderful, dignified people, did not have to respond to that. I felt actually good at the time that I did not have to respond, because there were about 4 people who beat me to it that said, how can you tell someone how they feel? How can you insult your colleagues who are sitting right here and you're telling them how Black teachers feel? Tell us who told you on your faculty? How many Black teachers do you have in your building? And so as we went through that entire conversation, we were really aggressive. There were a group of us out of the 35. There were probably about 6 people that were angry, and we responded aggressively to that, pointing out how we were perceived in the African American community in our town as being racist, as an organization, as a union, and how we were just demonstrating how accurate this portrayal and this perception was. And when I look back now, at the end of the night, there was, just a lot of tension. There was no pushback because we were so aggressive in the response. And later, we talked to our colleagues and apologized to them, and they actually smiled and said, "No, it was kind of fun watching you guys raise hell and not having to say or anything, but we've heard it, we understand it." And when I look back, I realized after 40 years of working to establish some type of equity and of opportunity for students and awareness, and to go get where we're going now, that we're reaching places now that we didn't reach before. And again, it was because every one of those white teachers in the room, and some of this other failures we had on individual buildings throughout this whole process, and we failed to make the change. There were pockets, there were some good things that happened with individuals, and there were individual lives changed, but there was no systemic change made. It's now almost 30 years later, and we're doing it again, basically the same exact thing. And is that the white teachers that struggled with the sense of systemic racism and we weren't really even using systemic racism, particularly at that time, but just talking about awareness and achievement gaps. And that they took it personally. It was an attack on them, and we've talked about that here. And in the book, she certainly addresses that it's seen as a personal attack. We did not have the awareness that we have now. If someone in that room, I was thinking, was able to say some of the things that are being said now, and some of what's pointed out in Robin's book, if we were able to have brought that forward at that time and take that responsibility off individuals and start to take a look at white privilege and white fragility at that time, I think we might have been more successful. So I think, I'm feeling so much more positive about the meaningful, lasting change can be made now because of some of the things that are happening. So wanted to share that.
Great, thank you, Stan.
Joanne?
Guess I have two things to share. One was recently through my work, we did a training with Resma. She referenced in the book, and through that training, I came to an aha, something that I've never had thought about as a white body person, that my physicality can be experienced as traumatic to a person of color. I had never had that awareness, that going into all the detail of the training. But just to know that just me as a person, because I would have put myself on the list on the right side. I'm progressive, I'm educated, I'm a nice person. And that thought never occurred to me because of the legacy as a white body person and the systemic racism that I need to be mindful that I am carrying that legacy, that heritage of white supremacy, and my impact, and be mindful of that. That was one. And I'll tell a story on myself, because people are referencing things that happened a long time ago, how insidious racial supremacy is. I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I can't tell exactly. So on Bardstown Road, waiting to pick my daughter up from choir practice, and sitting in my car, see across the street, I would say this African man, he was maybe 20 something, looked like a football player. It's very large, all dressed in black hoodie. And he was walking down the street, and then not super far from him was this little white girl, who was this little waif of a white girl. And I immediately became afraid for her. I felt it in my body. And I saw them come meet and embrace, and I just broke down in tears, because all the messages, I'm assuming all you white women, if you're honest, that you received either overtly or subtly about Black men and being afraid for them. And I thought, oh my God, that's still in there. And so I will share that, as it can be so insidious that it's sometimes, until you're in a context, that it had the opportunity to be put right back in your face, that yes, that's still in there, and that needs to be redeemed and healed. And so thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate it.
Joanne, that's a really good point. You know, we were really fed that story, starting with really maybe before that. Remember the movie Birth of a Nation? It was one of the first movies, and it was really, it instilled fear in people, particularly regarding the Black male. And there are lots of things through history where that message was delivered. And isn't it ironic that when you look back at the slave histories, it was white men who raped Black women? And yet, to justify slavery and to keep people down, we've been fed the lie that Black men are dangerous. And that is something we've been fed over and over. So I appreciate that you brought that up. That's a good point for us to be aware of.
So this is Maureen. I would like to share something. So going into the fall, JCPS desperately needed teachers, people that would teach NTI. And we're cooped up with the pandemic. And I said, okay, fine, I'll do it. I'll teach high school because I had retired. And I haven't been in high school in 40 years. So anyway, fine, you know, I'm going to teach high school, and one of the teachers is helping me, and we're probably a month into class, and the kids were starting to get more comfortable. And for the most part, they don't have their cameras on, so I don't know what they look like. I have no idea. Very bright students. It's one of the top schools in town. And one of the questions for them to introduce themselves, they were going to do slides, seemed harmless enough that the other teacher had put on there, and we looked at it. Okay. What are you afraid of? Okay. And I was reviewing their slides, and they had pictures of them. And one student, and they were going to introduce themselves to their class. And one student put that he was afraid that he was not going to live to be 21 as a Black man in Louisville, Kentucky. And I was like, whoa. And then I had another student, and again, I'm coming from corporate America that's pretty lily white. And the other student in a different class had said he was afraid of white people. And that one I was like, ooh, okay. So then you had the whole question of, what do you do? So, you know, well, of course you can't tell them you can't say this. You know, you had kids that are afraid of clowns, kids that are afraid of spiders, and they're putting this stuff out there, and kids are reacting in the chat box. So my student that is afraid that he's not going to live to be 21, who is an athlete, and my classes are probably 50% students of color, nobody's reacting. Okay, they're not shocked by that. Nobody even says anything. And I'm sitting there going, in my mind, how can you not be shocked about this? Are we supposed to have a conversation? But I'm not equipped to have a conversation regarding this with you all because, you know, I've lived in my corporate little world. So then I get to the next class where, and again, I thought I'm not going to cop out. Okay, the kid is sitting there saying he's afraid of white people. That chat box is lit up with kids talking about that. And what's interesting is a lot of the kids of color are calling him out saying, I can't believe you said that. My gosh, what are you thinking? How? And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, I don't know what to say, how to say it. And, you know, and I said something that I shouldn't have, like, okay, you know, I hear what you're saying. We all need to try to get along. That's not what anybody needed to hear. Okay. And I guess I was just blown away because I've never seen you know, I didn't think you were be afraid of white people.
Yeah.
Obviously, you know, yes, people, there's years and years and years of history of that. So, I mean, it was just this big eye opener for me. And to your all's point, part of the reason why I'm here is it's like, I've got to figure out how do you react when those things happen with sensitivity in the right way, and that you
I think you need to unmute, Maureen, if you're still talking.
I don't know how it muted
Okay,
on
there
its
you
own.
are. You're back in now.
No, but I mean, I was just amazed by that. So I thought I would share.
Thank you. I would just a quick comment, because something like this has come up in the past in some of our sessions. It can be a little, I guess maybe unsettling or jarring, whatever, when someone will speak that openly and honestly from their heart. There's a lot of conversation that goes on that remains kind of on the safe and superficial level. But when someone has the courage to be that open and that honest from their heart, it provides a whole different avenue of conversation that can lead to not only better understanding, but also the opportunity for maybe some empathy and some comfort and some healing offered to the person who expresses such feelings.
Go ahead, Emily.
Hey, Maureen, I just wanted to say I'm glad you shared that story. And I know I can imagine it it broke my heart to hear that's what you were getting via NTI, via the strangest timeline that we're all living in. And I'm really glad you shared that story, because I think it's hard to understand as people who view themselves as non-racist, progressive people, and it's hard to understand sometimes, or really come to terms with, well, there really isn't any reason for a person of color to trust me, a white woman, or me, a white man. There isn't a ton of good reason, because our track record is not terribly good. So I'm glad you had that experience, and I'm so sorry for that child and for all people of color who, would not feel like they could trust their white neighbor or fellow white church parishioner or their white teacher. And yeah, we have to do better. I just wanted to thank you for sharing that. That's it.
One thing that I did a talk, a sharing about my own life story as an African-American person and as an African-American priest. And then there's a second African-American priest who did the same thing. One of the things that after we shared our own experiences, that we were both asked, and we both wound up basically giving the same response to many different scenarios. And that is from the African-American experience in this country, in this society, and in this church, is we kept saying, we just would like to be heard. And I suspect that, if you have the opportunity to explore some of the feelings that are expressed by African-Americans, whether they're your students or colleagues or whatever, you're probably going to hear some of the same thing. There are many scenarios where we can speak up and address things, but we still know that we're not being heard. And so nothing productive happens.
But John, what does that mean, you'd like to be heard?
Let me give you an example, okay, from my own personal experience. While I've been here, I'm in the Archdiocese of Louisville. While I've been here, I've very, very often said in many scenarios, there's a difference between being made to feel welcome and being made to feel wanted. Okay. When I came here, there was only one African-American priest in the diocese before me, and he had already gone and worked outside the diocese for many years before I came. So I'm the second African-American seminarian becoming priest for the diocese. When I was ordained the deacon, we had a program, television, sort of a news broadcast on the Archdiocese called Closer Look. Someone at Closer Look decided it was important enough with this African-American being ordained a deacon that they should give some coverage. So they sent out the reporters and the cameras, et cetera, et cetera. And afterwards, I told everybody to watch the coverage, which I watched. 2 minutes of coverage on my deacon ordination. In 2 minutes, there were 6 biographical errors reported on me. Nobody talked to me. I don't know where they got that from, but they went ahead and aired it. Nobody verified anything with me. My first question, who's in charge? I went to the person in charge, I addressed it to him. And he offered me excuses. And I said, excuse me. I said, that was irresponsible journalism. I said, I don't know why someone would go and air that information without verifying whether or not it's true and accurate. Okay. Now, this is my problem, and I still have it today, 34 years later. Number one, he never agreed with me that it was irresponsible journalism. Number two, he never apologized for it. And number three, he never offered to air a correction later. Okay, so all of that was supposed to make me feel welcome, but it certainly did not make me feel wanted. And even though I addressed it with the right person in authority, in charge, not only did not go anywhere, but those lies were put out there to be left out there for everybody to believe about me.
John, that's a good example. Are you saying though, couldn't that happen for a white person also?
Absolutely.
Or is there something especially with the Black there that you want to accent?
The only reason I'm accenting it is because of my being only the second African-American coming in. And once again, they decided to give the courage. I didn't send for them. They decided it was important enough to give the courage, but then they did not air it accurately and factually.
Oh, my name is Ellen Lydian, and I want to, it may be a little off kilter, but then again, it's not. I worked at Jim Beam Distillery for 38 years, and I was the first Black secretary there. And somewhere or another, my father worked there, but he had mentioned to me, because I had just graduated out of high school, and he said, well, they're trying something different down there. They're going to hire some Blacks in the office. And he said, you know, you may want to try. I don't know if you'll get the job, but you can try. So I went down for an interview, and it was another lady with me as well. The guy that was interviewing us, we didn't even have a office called Human Resources. It was just during that time, you had this person stood in as the manager over the water plant department. He was over the distillery. And then in his little extra time, then he did human resource duties. So he interviewed me, and he says, I'm gonna put you back out in the lobby of the main office, and we're gonna interview another girl. So he did. And he brought me back in there, and he said, what I wanna do, he said, I wanna send you to the bottling department, and I'm going to send the other girl to the shipping department. See how you work out, and then if it doesn't work out, then maybe we'll switch you and see how that goes. So you have to remember that I am freshly out of high school, no college education or anything. So I went to the bottling department, and the lady's place that I was going to take, she had been promoted to a position as a bottling supervisor. So that meant that she would still be accessible to me because I was in the bottling department, but then she had to teach me very quickly because she had to go to her position within 2 weeks. So needless to say, like I said, I went there without a college education, but for being there for 38 years, it must have been something that I did right. But being a Black, you have to know that this being something new that they're trying, I'm one of the first Black secretaries at this company. So, you know, I did my job to the best of my abilities, because when I do my work, I take it very personally. But little did I know that I figured it out later on. There wasn't enough Blacks at that company. And then at the time, it was the dealings between EEOC, men and women working as men and all of that. So shortly after that, I was asked, did I know of any Blacks that needed a job? And I said, well, let me think about it. But I do know that you have to be really careful with when you give people's names to get jobs, because that will come back on you if they don't do a good job. So I only gave them like one person, and that was a person that I knew that was a really good worker. But then I found out shortly they had told me, they had given me no idea why they was asking me that question. And all I knew, because I worked with the union people and human resources and payroll and all of that. So whenever these people was being hired, you know, I would work with them as well. But what really was happening at that time was they did not have their quota of Black people. So that's why they was going to go out and hire anybody practically that put in an application at Jim Beam Distillery so they could get their quota up for Blacks. And then it would be over the years that, you know, would go by, you know, I would see visitors that would come into the plant, because one of my managers, he was the one that was leader with giving people visits over the bottling department. Well, one day, this group of visitors came in. It was about 12 of them, and they passed by my office as they go into his office. Well, it was a man and a woman stopped in my office, and they was just smiling so big. They's like, oh my Lord, we are so happy to see you. And they was Black. And they said, well, where's all the Black people out around here? I said, well, we're very limited. I said, as far as the different departments that we have, which was many, we only had like 3 supervisors. They was all men, not a female. And I said, and as far as the Black people, I said, hold on, let me get this seniority list over here. So I got the seniority list and I counted how many Blacks we actually had at the plant. She said, this is a worldwide known plant, Jim Beam. And this is all the Black people that they have here? She said, something's wrong with this picture. She said, something is seriously wrong with this picture. I said, well, I'm always asking, where's the Black people at? Where's the Black people at? Well, see, they've always told people that I wasn't a team player. So, but that wasn't true, because I can get along with anybody. Just give me a chance and let me see what I can show you that I can do. So it would be like some meetings that we would have. And then one manager in particular, he would say, I don't want y'all to comment on anything. Because, you know, I'm a secretary in there with a bunch of other managers and supervisors. He said, I don't want you to say anything because we're going to get this meeting over with. And then we'll let them have whatever they want. And then we'll continue on with the meeting because they're not going to be changed anyway. I'm not that kind of person. They would ask something in particular that I knew that I wanted to answer to, and so did the other people, supervisors and secretaries, want an answer to, but they wouldn't say anything. So I would ask the plant manager a question, and they would be like looking around at me and stuff. I said, look, you know what? I'm the only one that's got enough guts to ask you this question, so we really do need to know the answer to that. But I guess I was considered like a token, a Black secretary around all these white people that worked in the office. And like I said, you want to do the best that you can do, because you're not only proving it to yourself, you're proving it to that company that you can hire a Black person that can handle anything as strongly and without failure as anybody else. So needless to say, that was what I wanted to say, was that when different people would come in, and then every once in a while a Black person would stop at my desk and say, where's the Black people at? And then another thing I want to say was I fought tooth and nail to get promoted from this secretarial position. I had a manager. It was 2 managers. I had one manager, he had cancer. And they called me to the main office one day. And he said, do you know why you're here? And I said, no. He said, Ellen, I want to do something for you. He said, because he said, you are such an asset to the company. I want to make sure that I do something for you before I leave this world. And he gave me a position of administrative assistant, which, because a lot of the duties that I had at the other plants that we have, Cincinnati and other places, there was nobody in that position that did as much as I did. So that was why he gave me that position. And I was just totally overwhelmed that he really felt that strongly, you know, to promote me to such a thing. He died about 4 months after that. And then it was another manager that he had worked with. Well, he retired. So about the time that he retired was when one day, it was like about 4 months after that, the manager that I had in position at that time, because I went through about 9 managers, he told me, he said, Ellen, he said, I have to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, I have to tell you that your title as administration assistant is going to be changed back to secretarial. And I said, for what reason? He said, I really can't say. They just told me to tell you, so I told you. So then I found out shortly after that, just from working with a girl in the next office that hadn't been there very long, that one day she was talking and I saw her paperwork that we was discussing, and I saw administrative assistant, and I said, there's my title. So pretty much, like I said, all the years that I was there, I had to scratch and prove myself that I was, you know, good at what I did. So to make a long story short, no matter how I fought it, I still didn't get anywhere. And, you know, I tell other people nowadays that are Black, you can reach for the sky, do whatever you feel that you want to do, you can do it. And I said, and you know, it's a white man's world, but we are in the world as well, and we have to prove ourselves. So no matter what, don't nobody tell you that you can't make it, because you can. And the only reason they got me away from my job was I happened to come down with cancer. So God evidently knew what to do, because when I was involved with, when you call union conversations, when there was a contract coming up and different things of that nature. So I had to type up my ideas of what I thought. And then one day, a guy from Chicago came down. He was a VP. And I wasn't involved in the actual meetings that they had with the union, but they did take my considerations. So he called one day and he said, Ellen? I said, yes. He said, you know who this is? I said, yeah, it's Harry. You're from Chicago. You're down here with negotiations. He said, I want to ask you something. He said, I've got you on speakerphone. And I know that you're the only person around here that will actually answer me truthfully. And he asked me something about how was something done in the last contract, because they was discussing it in the present contract. And he said, I've got you on speakerphone. And he said, he asked me the question. I said, well, do you want to answer truthfully? Because you know, it's the only way that I know to do it. He said, yes. And I answered him truthfully. And he said, thank you for that. And then that was the end of the conversation. But if he even thought of me as well as that much to know that I knew what I knew, then that was why he asked. So to make a long story short, we are there, and being working with union issues and stuff like that, I saw a lot of things go across my desk. That why was specific Black people fired of situations that came up that identical white people was under the same one and never lost their job. And I used to ask my manager, and he says, Ellen, he says, just do what they tell you to do. So that's what I did. I didn't like it, but in order for me to keep my job, I'm a self-provider. That's what I had to do. I had to turn my head to a lot of things, but it made me sick. It made me sick. So whenever anything would come up about certain things, and they said, well, Ellen, do you know anything about this situation? I said, I don't want to answer. I said, because you're not treating everybody the same. So they would leave me alone after that. But like I said, 38 years, I had to know something, right? That's all I want to say. But like you said, you want to be, feel like you're one of the group, you know, like you said, Father John, being heard, but being welcomed as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you for sharing that, Ellen. I know that's, you know, a lot of years of pain, really. And a lot of us just don't even know how bad that would be. Your story and Father John's reminded me of Sister Thea Bowman's video. I don't know if you all got to watch that. It was on last week's list. But she talked to the U.S. Catholic bishops in the late 80s. And she articulated very clearly what Black Catholics were asking for. They wanted to be fully present and fully listened to and fully heard as parishioners and as participants in Mass. And she was so eloquent. There was no mistaking her message. But if you go to Mass, our Masses are very white almost everywhere in the city. So there hasn't been a lot of progress. So I can understand why Black Catholics would feel not heard. And I know, I think our church means well, but there are lots of other instances where decisions are made for Black Catholics or for women Catholics. And so a lot of us know a little bit about that, what that feels like, maybe not how it is to be a Black Catholic, but how it feels like to be a woman in the Catholic Church. So as a human being, you want to be heard, you want to be affirmed. And that's something our Black brothers and sisters haven't had the privilege that most of us have. You know, we've had that privilege of being listened to, at least in some situations. So Ellen, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I know it was really painful, but I think it helps us to hear some of that.
I just want to make a quick statement about African Americans not being heard. Just kind of talking back to the George Floyd murder is what I'm going to call it. Breonna Taylor murder is what I'm going to call it. And even looking at what happened at the Capitol building with our, I'm going to say, European brothers and sisters in a nice way. But a lot of times Black people just get tired of the racist acts, the discrimination against us. When we do speak out in a peaceful way, ears are turned off, hearts are turned off, and the head is turned the other direction as if we don't even exist. So sometimes people have to act a fool to get your attention, you know, and even though I'm not into rioting and looting, it got your attention. But it seems that people were more paying attention to the act rather than the reason behind it. And so a lot of times it feels that in certain situations, you know, ears are deaf to our wants and needs. And it's pretty sad. So that's all I want to say. And I'm Renee, I'm Ellen's sister.
Someone was going to speak?
Linda? Unmute yourself.
We have 5 children, and my 2 daughters both were pregnant at the same time and had their babies 10 days apart. And one daughter has biracial children, African American and white, and the other daughter has white children. And I remember holding those 2 boys, they're now 12, them when they were born, and looking at them and saying, you know, Jonah's life is going to be easy and Justice's life is going to be tough just because his skin is dark. And that's been really painful. My son also has an African-American son, Josh, whom has been in our family since he was 5. He's now 25. And he's had many run-ins with the police for no reason. And I keep thinking, as well as my son-in-law, and I keep thinking, this is just our family. We've had about 6 or 7 run-ins with the police with my African-American family members. How many other African-American families in the United States multiply that? It's got to be millions of times. And the pain is just so awful. My grandson was driving my Lexus car in Eugene, Oregon, and he got pulled over by the police for no reason. And he got scared, and they pulled him over and said, "You couldn't afford a car like this." And he said, "This is my grandma's car. She gave it to me for the day." and they impounded my car and left him on the side of the road. And I know that if I ever, I have a breakdown with my car. Oh, and the tow truck, he said, the tow truck man, would you please take me into town? He says, no, don't you touch my car. And I've broken down before, and everybody offers to have me come sit in the tow truck and we'll take care of you. And the dichotomy is just so obvious, so we pay for an attorney, and a lot of families don't have that, to get that policeman to be accountable for what he had done. My son-in-law was stopped with my daughter and my grandchildren in the car again for driving. He was driving for no reason. Same thing. We had to get an attorney, get the policeman to get, and it just keeps going on. My son-in-law and my daughter were waiting outside of a restaurant. They were dressed up for her birthday. And my son-in-law went into a jewelry store, and she was outside the store waiting for them to go into the restaurant. And within about 3 minutes, the Tiger police, not the mall police, had been called, and they put handcuffs on him because they thought his wallet in the back of his pants was a gun. And, humiliated him. And it was my daughter, they were all dressed up and ready to go. And then, they didn't apologize. They just unhooked him. So I went the next week, and I sent my husband in there with a wallet in the back of his pants. And they just said, can I help you? And my husband just said, no, I'm fine. I went in with the wallet in the back of my pants, and they said, oh, can we clean your rings for you? Would you like to look at something? I said, don't you touch anything I have, because you called the police on my son-in-law last week, and I will never come in here again. And I walked out, and he got all hot and left. And so it's just, and here I'm white. I'm just trying to struggle from my children and my son-in-law and my grandchildren. And it's easy for me, but it's painful for mine. I had my grandchildren at a jumping place where you jump on trampolines. And there was an African-American man next to me watching his son, who was like 9 or 10. And this white child, like about 12, started throwing the ball to hit his head. And his white grandma was sitting there. And it says really clearly, do not throw the balls below, it has to be below the waist. And the little boy black boy kept saying, stop. And the dad kept saying, would you please tell your grandson to stop? And he didn't. So the father finally got frightened, and he went in and he grabbed the white child and said, stop doing that to my child. And the grandma called the police.
Yeah.
So they were there in 5 minutes. I sat next to this black dad. I put my hand on his back, and I said, I'm just here. I'm right here with you. I'm just going to be here. And the police came, and she was yelling, and I just kept saying, I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. And those police actually understood that this woman was off base. And she said, he needs to apologize for grabbing and he didn't need to apologize, but he did. I mean, because he's used to doing that, right? To protect himself, this father. So I just share those few incidences in my family. There's going to be more, because my other grandchildren are ages 9, 11, and 13. My African-American, my other older one is 25. My son-in-law is 40. And that's just been in the last 3 years. How many more families have to go through that? Incidences like that have to be in the millions, because our families had like 10. There's some that my grandson has not even told me about. He'll walk into 7-Eleven and the person will say, take your hood off, I can't see your face. And he'll have to say, that white kid has a hood on his head, you can see his face. He shouldn't have to talk for himself. Where are the other white people in there? Why aren't the white? It's our responsibility. It's not African-American families that are supposed to, it's our privilege. It's our privilege that's making that happen. So it's our responsibility to step up and say something and do something. And I go to bed every night thinking, you know, my 25-year-old grandson is saying, Mimi, I'm moving to Mexico. I lived there for a while and it's safer there than it is here. I'm glad he's moving to Mexico. He's not safe here. I'm afraid for my 13-year-old grandson to get his driver's license. But I'm not afraid for my white 13-year-old grandson to get his driver's license. He'll be fine. That's not fair. Anyway, and because of that, you know, I've taught diversity classes for 15 years at Portland Community College with an African-American coworker, a really close friend of mine. We taught it together, went through a lot of stuff together. And I think the only way that we can make a difference is to stand up, to teach other people to stand up safely and clearly, and to educate. You know, I was in a centering prayer meeting just 2 weeks ago at St. Bernadette. I go every Monday. And one woman said, you know, racism doesn't still exist. It did in the 50s. And I knew at that time it was not right to say something because she wasn't ready. I could tell that. And the whole next week I thought, what am I going to do when I go back? And I figured out the way to do that is to develop relationships. So the next week came around and we shared something about our brothers dying. And she looked at me with she softened her face and she said, I had the same experience I had with my brother. And we walked out of church together and she started to share some hard things for her. And I'm thinking, here's a door. It's going to take time. But if I had yelled at her or gotten frustrated, she would have just shut down. So we have to build relationships, but we have to stand up when we see things happening. I was at a Macy's department store and an African-American woman had a $20 bill. And the woman held it up to the light. I was behind her and I stood up right next to her and I said to the white woman, you wouldn't do that to me, would you? And that's all I said. And then I went back in line just to make her aware.
Good for you.
And those opportunities are there.
They are.
They're there. It's our responsibility. It's not, it's, you know, it's that's what we have to do. We have to be aware. So the pain that I feel from my children and my grandchildren is really hard. I can't imagine all the African-American families day in and day out worrying about survival and safety. I feel like I've got a foot in both worlds. You know, the privileged world and the underprivileged world. So.
Linda, thank you for sharing that and thank you for being you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I mean, that gives us all a really food for thought. How can we be advocates? Where do we need to speak up? I mean, we definitely have responsibilities, no doubt. And you took us right into the chapter 6, anti-Blackness, right? The unfairness of our society toward Black people.
Exactly. I had a colleague whose son passed away, unfortunately, at the age of 19. And he dropped dead on a basketball court at college. But people made assumptions immediately. He was a Black young man. They made an assumption that he had either been shot or he had been on drugs. You know, it was just horrifying. And so not only did this colleague have to mourn the loss of her son, she had to, you know, explain how he died and, you know, almost vouch for his character, which just is so wrong. And that when I was reading chapter 7, that's what really, it was a memory that came to mind, that just isn't the way it should ever be.
But you'll see that played out over and over in the media when, for example, when an African-American is shot by the police, all of a sudden you hear anything negative about that person. And you don't hear that when a white person is involved in crime. And this is a person who is innocent and shot by police. And it's almost like we have to justify this violence that just happened to this person, but it's not fair. And you don't see that on the other side. And Ellen's sister mentioned, I mean, I don't want to get way into that, but the Capitol riots compared to the riots in Louisville, which were much more peaceful. And there was much more, not really acceptance, but there was a different response to the white people rioting versus the Black people rioting. I mean, it's very clear if you watch the news and listen to the stories unfolding in front of us.
Let me bring up something also that Robin mentioned in chapter 6 near the end of it, as we'll get, our time is getting short. Some of these things that we're talking about is a result of what triggers white rage, the terminology she uses, what triggers white rage. And she says, inevitably, it's Black advancement. It's not the mere presence of Black people that's the problem. It's Blackness with ambition, with drive, with purpose, with aspirations, and demands for full and equal citizenship. And that is perceived in many instances as being a threat to those of the dominant white culture. So I think it's also important in whatever areas that we have operated or continue to operate to be aware of, especially people who have drive, have ambition, have purpose, have talent and gifts, and whether or not they're given equal opportunity to develop and share those in the proper context with others, or whether they're being actively squelched so that they don't have the opportunity to grow and advance equally with others.
I wanted to mention something. This is Ellen again. Years ago, when I got my first apartment, I was really happy. And so, you know, at the whole top floor, there was a Sisters of Charity that lived there. And it was right across the street from St. Joseph's Church. So I knew there was an elderly lady that lived right beside me. You know, when I come out my door, her door is directly to the left. So I knew one day, I was like, well, I'm gonna see if she needs anything from the store, because she was an elderly lady. She didn't get out on a regular basis. She didn't drive. So I knocked on her door, and she said, come in. So I went in, I said, hi, I said, my name is Ellen. I said, I'm your next door neighbor next door. I said, I'm getting ready to go to the grocery store. I said, do you need anything? She said, sit down. So I did. And then she looked at me and she said, why did you move up here? Why didn't you move with your own kind? And I said, hey, excuse me? She said, why did you move up here? Why didn't you move with your own kind? I said, well, ma'am, I said, my own kind? I said, times aren't like that now. I said, we can live anywhere we want to live. And I said, when I saw this apartment, I liked it. So I decided I wanted to move here. And she said, oh. I said, so is there anything that you need from the grocery store? And she said, no, but thank you. I said, okay. I said, well, you have a nice day. And I left outside the door and I thought about it for a while. And it didn't hit me the wrong way, because if it had, I would have said, you white Peckerwood, what's your problem? But I didn't, because I wasn't raised to disrespect my elders, no matter what color they were. But needless to say, I tried one other time when I was going to the store. I knocked on the door just as nicely and asked her again, do you need anything today? And she said, no, I don't. So that was the end of that story. But I know we had a class reunion, and one of her grandsons was at the class reunion. He was one of my the guys that I graduated with. And he said, I said, your grandmother? I said, you got a grandmother that lives at Cathedral Manor? He said, yeah. He said, oh, Lord, What'd she say? I said, well, she asked me, why did I move in that area? And he said, oh my God. I said, well, it's okay. I said, it's all right. I said, she's just one of them old ladies from times that thinks places are the same, but we're not. So needless to say, that wasn't that very many more years ago. So we still haven't gotten out of that even now.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ellen.
I'm Angela Weathers. I'm here in Elizabethtown. I've been down here since '79. I was recruited to come down here to work for Elizabethtown Independent Schools because at the time they didn't have a lot of Black teachers. And I was coming out of the university, and it was just actually, it was just a favor of my mentor at U of L, which brought me down here. And then here I am all these many years later, right here, retired from the school district. But that was my opportunity to work here. And Father John, you talked about welcome versus wanted. And everybody welcomed me, but there were quite a few on the staff that really didn't want me there. And I was constantly proving myself. I was constantly being challenged. I was constantly being questioned, and and you have to roll with it and bear with it and do your best and show up and show out. That's what I had to do. And there was some rage by some of the white folks that were on that staff. They didn't want me there, but I stayed there, and I made a success out of the situation. So as far as that last chapter in the book, and it talked about how there are white folks that just don't want to see progressive Black folks. I mean, that's very evident. I mean, we had a Black president, and he was disrespected in a lot of ways, but he made it work for himself. So that was my experience. That was my opportunity. That's why I'm down here, and that's it. I hope you all understood me, because I understand last time my audio was messed up.
No, we got you clearly. Thank you so much for sharing that, Angela.
Thank you. And
Thank
for
you.
your commitment to the kids too, and all your years of service.
Thank you for appreciating it. That's why my hair is gray.
You deserve it.
Okay, we're coming up on our 8:30 mark. If I will leave it open, I'll leave the Zoom meeting open for about 15 more minutes for people who want to continue the conversation. For those who need to leave, please feel free to leave. And thank you for joining tonight. And I'll leave the Zoom open for about 15 more minutes.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to reiterate is something Father John said. It's important for us as human beings to care about the feelings of other people and to realize that anti-racism is really heart work. It's not really an intellectual pursuit. Yes, we can learn about it. We can have facts and figures, but hearing the stories of our Black friends and coworkers and associates gives us such a better understanding. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot from so many people today, all of you, and I thank you for talking. But if we can all, in the next couple of days, next week, before we meet again, think a little bit about how we can increase our bubble. We all live in a bubble, and it's pretty small now because of COVID. But how can we interact with people of all different persuasions, other genders and races and ethnicities, so that we can really appreciate the diversity that surrounds us. And just think about that. And we'll talk about that next week. How can I increase my bubble? We talked about the first week how our bubble was pretty white and limited, and a lot of African Americans had a pretty African American bubble. But how can we get to know people and develop tolerance that will make people's lives better and will make people's children and grandchildren safer? That's kind of where I kind of want to leave it tonight.
And I think if we think about it, there are a lot of opportunities to forge open, honest, and meaningful relationship with other people, so that we can talk with one another on a deeper level and not just a superficial level about things, but on a deeper level to understand how people are feeling and why, and then to be ready to respond to it in some supportive and life-giving way. Anyone else have any thing they'd like to say before we close out?
I will just say one thing for me and my sister. We're very blunt, very open. We've got friends and family of all different races and sexual preferences and religions, etc. If anyone does ever want to ask a Black person and get a very good, blunt answer, you're welcome to contact us. We'll be glad to talk to you. I love friends. I got friends and family of all kinds and types. All of the above. We'll welcome you to the family too. All right. So if you're interested, we'll leave our phone number or something next time if you do want to talk outside the forum.
Don't be scared of us, because there's no reason to be scared. We're just real.
We're just regular folk.
Yep, we're just real.
That's that's very generous. Yes.
I had an experience. I'm Marcia, and had an experience. I guess it was 2019 or might have been 2020. Two other people from the cathedral, me and another lady, we went to the African American Day of Reflection, and there was one other white person there who goes to St. Augustine, is in the choir. And we had such a good day. And I think how I felt on that day, one group I went to was a married couple, an African American married couple that was talking about, marriage relationships. And it just was, it was so, it was similar to me, that kind of thing. I felt at that time, when I went there, I had so much in common with these loving, caring people that I went with, and I got to go to the mass, and it was very and have the mass from an African American experience, and it was so joyful, and it really helped. It helped me from that perspective of feeling welcome, but sharing with our Black Catholic community. And I would suggest that when you see the African American Day of Reflection, if you have a chance to go, it's really a wonderful, wonderful day. It's a wonderful, I don't know, a very good religious experience too. And that's all right now. And I thank everybody too for what they've said today.
And I promise you, if you have the opportunity to come and join us for one of our African American Catholic Days of Reflection, I promise you're going to have fun. You're going to have a good time.
I've joined the Louisville. I've joined the Louisville Urban League since things happened this spring, and so Paul and I got to go to a virtual Valentine party Saturday with the Louisville Urban League Guild, and it was a blast. We had so much fun. And I also will tell you, and many of you know this, but if you go to church at Immaculate Heart of Mary or Christ the King or St. Augustine or Martin de Porres, you will be welcome, and you will have an African American experience, and you will be so welcome. You'll be glad you went. And Father, are they having in-person services right now? Do you know?
I do know that St. Martin de Porres definitely is, for sure. That I'm sure of. I'm not quite sure about the other ones at this point.
Yeah.
I do want to mention some along the same lines, though, is I don't know how many of you are following this is Black History Month in the United States, and a number of programs on KET. Tomorrow night at 9 o'clock, they're going to do a session on the Black church about the African American worship experience. It's 2 parts, so it'll be 9 o'clock tomorrow night and 9 o'clock Wednesday night on KET. And I'm sure it'll be repeated. So you could go on their website and check out their programming schedule. But it's on it'll explore different aspects and dynamics of the experience of worship in the African American community.
I looked it up last night, and if you're on Spectrum, it's on channel 139. So I'm taping it. I want to watch them both. So thanks for that, Doctor.
Great suggestion. Yeah, great suggestion.
Bellarmine 2 is going to have a Black History lecture at 3 p.m. on the 21st. I can send Joan that link.
That'd be great.
Because there is a registration for it, and it's related to Thomas Merton. That's the Dr. Pearson is the head of the Thomas Merton Center. So I mean, Joan is my daughter, so so I have her. You know, I email her all the time. So I'll email her that link, and then she can email it out.
That's great.
I want to throw in, I'm Paul, I want to throw in a little thing about going to church, Christ the King or Immaculate Heart or whatever. And whenever I have done that, I always go out, and Father will tell you I say this, I really feel like I've been to church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a different experience. I just walk out filled with the Spirit. That's all I can say.
Mm-hmm. So true.
I would like to share an inspirational short story. This is Urson Sister Julia. And last week on Dr. Oz program, he was sharing his 2000 sessions that he has had in the last 12 years. But he was recognizing different people. And one woman that was being recognized, she was an African American who worked in housekeeping in a hospital, and she was working on the floor where the COVID patients were, where no family members, no one could come in to visit. But she showed such joy and kindness to these patients, and even when she was being recognized by Dr. Oz, that you could see the joy from within that she had for welcoming people. But in recognizing her, Dr. Oz says, we want to give you, for all your hard work and your kindness, we want to give you a week's vacation on an island with all expenses paid, plane fare, the hotel, and extra money, and to take a friend with you. And she was just radiant, and it just lifted me up to see someone that has such a position or such a job to be recognized, and to for her joyfulness and kindness and her hard work and being there, being present to those people who were dying. So that was very inspiring to me.
Good. Thank you,
Beautiful
Sister Julia.
Story. Thank you. Anybody else?
If you don't mind, when we,
yeah, go ahead. You go first, Father.
I was just gonna say, when we have our next session next week, I maybe we could take just a few minutes. For those who are able to watch the video on the Black church, then we can just kind of process your own expressions or reactions or whatever you got out of watching it. Okay, we can just kind of process that together for just a little bit.
401 607.
I think that's a great idea.
77.
I just really, if we have another minute, if you didn't get a chance to read the article, The Luxury of White Privilege by Jackie Summers, it's really well done and it compares racism to a virus. And I love the one thing was most people would rather admit to having herpes than being racist. That cracked me up. It's so true. But it's a really well-written article that really eliminates racism. If you didn't read it, it's a good read and it's a good one to share with people because it really illuminates just how pervasive and ever present this is. Okay. Okay, well, we'll see you all next week. I hope you get to see some of the programming about the Black church and we can include that in our discussion.
All right. All right. Thank you, Father John. Oh,
Thank you, everybody. It's good
All
to
right,
be
thank
with
you.
you tonight.
Thank you. Good night. Night. Thank you so much.